Hey, welcome to Dawn's on Me podcast. I'm Dawn Kirk, and I am here today with my guest, Tim Kubik, who we're going to meet in a second, who's going to teach us a little bit about how to get involved with local politics in a way we might not know, and that should be a little bit more accessible than some of the ways we might have done in the past. So I'm glad you're here. Let's go ahead and get started. Tim Kubik is our Larimer County Democratic Chair. He's also the chair of the Colorado DEI, which is the Democratic Education Initiative at the state level, involved kind of at all levels, trying to help us have representation. He works in education as well, and he's one of our neighbors here in Northern Colorado. He's a community member. So I'm really glad to introduce Tim. Tim, welcome.
Thanks, Don. It's good to be on.
Thanks. I'm so glad you're here. So it dawns on me, fun name, right? Um, that some of us, myself included, don't necessarily know how to get involved locally. Even though I am involved locally, it tends to be because somebody says, "Hey, do you want to do this thing?" And I go to the thing. And so I was hoping that you could teach us a little bit more about what's different with our new virtual caucusing and kind of the whole process.
Okay, sure. Happy to take that on. And, I like that you mentioned the fact that most of us get involved through networking, right? Through making connections with people and people start letting us know, right? And a lot of people think that policy is about politics or politics is about policy, but really it's about that networking that makes all of those conversations possible. And a great way to start out on that has traditionally been by meeting at neighborhood community caucuses, which in Colorado we're required to do every 2 years in a general election year, so that rank and file Democrats have a chance to connect with one each other, to do a little networking, find out, for example, some parts of our county, most people don't even know who the Democrats are because they're all nervous about being out as Dems, right? So meeting some people that you didn't know were Dems, connecting with old friends who are Dems. Um, but the most important part about caucuses is the idea that rank and file Democrats will have input in thinking about who our candidates should be. Back in the old days of smoke-filled rooms, right, in before the 1960s when caucuses were introduced, a lot of those decisions were made by party leadership in backroom deals. And that sort of consummated in the debates at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. And a group of people sort of started to talk about some reform process that would give rank and file Democrats more voice in what goes on. And the neighborhood caucus was what that produced. And for much of the last 50 years, those caucuses have happened in people's houses. Um, initially in the first 20 or 30 years, for sure, they happened at people's houses. Then they started to get bigger as more people realized there was a value in attending. Um, and so they started to move to schools or maybe community buildings, which were more accessible to people. People were more comfortable going to a public building rather than to someone's house they didn't know. In 2024, we're going to try something a little bit different, and that is to allow the caucuses to happen virtually. Um, Using Zoom, which you and I are on right now, and most everybody learned something about Zoom during the pandemic. Our reason for wanting to do it virtually rather than in a public school building is twofold. And then I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what goes on at a caucus. But, um, you know, uh, the first thing is that a caucus, whether it's on a Saturday morning or a weeknight, right? There are a lot of people who can't attend. They need childcare. They're maybe not feeling well. They maybe just got off work and don't really feel like driving to another meeting. And so what we're hoping to do with the virtual caucus is increase inclusion and also a sense of welcoming, because rather than wandering into a room that you may or may not know people in, you're just going to pop into a big Zoom meeting and there'll be lots of people there. And at worst case, you'll get broken out into a precinct caucus room. And the precinct is our lowest level of organization in the party, where you might be with 7 or 8 other people who are talking about some political decisions that need to be made at the local level in order to get that process heading toward presidential nomination and candidate nomination in our local elections taken care of. So we're really hoping it'll be a more accessible and inviting and safe space. because you're not going to have to physically go into a strange room and wonder what's going on. The other reason we want to do it virtually is that it's a huge money saver for us as a county party, and we'd rather be spending that money on elections than renting rooms all over the place and printing a lot of paper that most everyone immediately throws out at the end of the day. So that's why we want to go virtual, and I'm excited about the possibilities that it offers.
Fantastic. Look, I'm already smarter, although I do have more questions. So, um, I have been using Zoom for a while, but I know that worked at a tech company, and not everybody, even if they had to, loves to do Zoom. So, what about those who, are not sure what to do with that? How is there anything that we have planned to help those who might
Sure.
not love the Zoom part?
Yeah. Um, so I do know one thing that's happening sort of informally, and I'm kind of glad to see it, is that um, some folks are having meetings at their houses where they'll all sit around their laptops and share a reliable internet connection, maybe be there to help somebody else. And I love that stepping up volunteer spirit that people are taking in doing that, particularly in some of our counties or parts of the county where the internet may not be that great, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and that is one of the things we're asking as we're pre-registering for Zoom is we are asking people how reliable is your internet, so that we can get a sense whether there's anything that we have to help people with. Um, we're doing some workshops at the county party level. We did one this past Tuesday virtually, which went pretty well. People seem to like the way the workshop went. It was both informative and role playing and activity, so people could practice sort of what it feels like to be at caucus. We're doing another one of those Saturday, the 10th of February, at the Larimer County Dems office at 604 South Mason Street. And that'll be hybrid, so people can either log on by Zoom or show up at the office and learn more about how to use Zoom. And then we're doing another one virtually next Tuesday, the 13th, to give people as much practice as possible. We'll record that one on the 13th and make that available to people on our website. And then, of course, we have this podcast that we're sharing, so people can learn a little bit more about it. Worst comes to worst, starting February 20th, and I want to stress that date because that's when we'll have volunteers who are ready to go for this. People can call our office if they need some support. Um, and there'll be volunteers who have a little script to walk you through to help you understand what you need to do to register for the caucus on Zoom. And the office number is 970-689-6391. Again, that's 970-689-6391. And so if you really don't know anything about Zoom, you can call the office, get a little bit of walkthrough about how to pre-register. I'd also recommend that most local libraries offer simple courses on how to use Zoom. They're not super detailed, but it's enough to figure out how to log on, how to activate certain buttons in the meeting, that kind of stuff. So we're hoping that people will take advantage of that also.
Look at you. I realized that was sort of like are you, do we have an answer? And look, you have a lot of good answers, actually. So I love that. I especially like the idea of the house party. So for those people who got involved with this because they like the social aspect, like that's still an option, right? But if you hadn't said it, I don't know that I would have ever thought of it. So that is a great idea. But I am also equally as excited about the idea that I don't have to leave the house. I don't have to put on like anything but my pajamas, right? Because I don't even have to turn on the camera. Like that always gets me too. Like especially, on those days when it might not be as warm like it's going to be this weekend. So
Yeah. Well, I do have to correct you. We are going to ask people to turn on the camera
all
uh,
right, see.
when they check in. So
Okay.
that I mean, most of our credentials volunteers, that morning who are going to be working the room, they're
Mhm.
come from all over parts of the county. So most of them will probably know the Democrats who show up. And it also just helps us know there's an age appropriate person, right? Like it's not just some 12-year-old who saw this on the web or heard it on the podcast and like logged in.
Yeah.
Um, a
Yeah.
reminder that 16 years and up can participate in the caucus if they're pre-registered as Dems, right? Um, and that means they can also be a delegate or be a precinct organizer if they want to. But we do kind of want to know that there's a real person behind there and not some sort of a bot or something.
Yeah,
Um, so when
yeah.
people show up, initially we're going to ask them to turn on their camera. I suspect a lot of people will turn off their camera after the meeting starts, but we do want to see like your lovely face for a moment. So we get that social feeling as opposed to just okay, there's a bunch of black boxes on here and we don't really know who's behind the screen. So that's going to be part of the process. The morning of caucus on March 9th is when you check in, you're at least going to have to turn on your camera.
Well, that is good to know. I will brush my teeth, comb my hair, but I'm probably still going to wear my pajamas, like,
That
flannel and brush my teeth, and we'll be good to go.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's so good. All right, so there are other things I wonder about. First off, I got really excited about the 16 and over. I remember hearing that a while back, and you just reminded me of how exciting that is. I know that we
Mhm.
have young people who really want to get involved. And so when do you have to be 16 in order to participate? Like, is your birthday before March 9th? Like 16th on March 9th?
So you have to be a pre-registered voter,
Okay.
um, or a registered Democratic voter. You have to be registered with the party to participate in Democratic Party caucuses, and that's important. This is not an open thing that anybody can come to. Because we're conducting official party business as required by state statute. And so you must be a registered Democrat. Same thing is true on the Republican side. Since we don't really have an unaffiliated party in Colorado, right? They don't have caucuses, but the Democrats and the Republicans do. Everyone who attends caucus needs to be a registered Democratic voter or pre-registered Democratic voter by February 16th in
Ooh,
order to participate. And that's coming up pretty quick, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so that is an important criteria. Um, Anyone's welcome to come and attend if they want to, but they cannot be an active voting participant or serve in any of the positions that we elect if they were not an active Democratic voter by February 16th, which is 22 days before the caucus.
I love that. Sorry. I mean, I realized that I was like very honed in on that because I have a 15-year-old who is
Yeah,
about to be 16, and I know that the days matter. So I'm in that very small window of like, wait, what day is it?
yeah.
So thank you for indulging me in that.
No,
So
not at all.
yeah, it's great. I mean, really, I want everybody to be involved. I know that young people have a real interest in this, and the like idea that they don't is mostly because they need information like this on how do I get involved. Maybe
Yeah.
I can do it when I, those kind of things are how we make things attainable. And that is clear to me in all of the ways that you have thought through how to make this accessible. It's really like ageless. It's, if you have internet, if you don't have internet, if you have a place to go, if you need help, if you need someone to walk you through it, there's a real human you can talk to in several places. Those things are so important because it's the relationships that are a big piece of this.
Yeah.
So,
It's
speaking of
that
that,
networking, it's that networking I talked about. And then I like that you said, young people want to be involved. They may not know how. That's kind of true about everybody, but I'm going to share a quote that I've always loved from former Democratic Texas governor back in the days when Democrats could win governor in Texas, Ann Richards, who's famous for saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu,
that's right. That's
right?
right.
And so
Yeah.
I'd encourage people to come out to this table and be involved, right?
Yes, well said. What a great quote to pull out for people to just get motivated to do this.
Hmm.
So, I went a few years ago and it was super fun. I mean, honestly, there were a lot of things that I learned at that event. I had a little bit more knowledge at that point, so I was able to pay more attention to what we were talking about, and I had less questions about how it worked. The first time I was like, where am I going? What am I doing? And then, all that went away after about 5 minutes. People pointed me in the right direction, and then we got into the topic. So I think it is super fun to get involved with this. It's also really cool when it is people that you know. And so that was another thing I wanted to ask you about. what are we deciding? What are
Okay.
we talking about? Who is gonna be the people that we're looking at? What's that kind of look like?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, this is like the first official step in a process that the Colorado Democratic Party uses to allow rank and file voters to be involved in longer term decision making that goes all the way through until the presidential convention in Chicago this year, later in the summer, right? Um, you kind of have to participate in every step along the way to have a shot at going to the national convention in Chicago. And it's a great time if you go. I did it back in 2012. Um, but what we're really talking about at caucus, which is this first step, is a couple of things. Um, and a lot of vocabulary will get bantered about at caucus. So I'll share two concepts that are really important. One is a precinct organizer. So Larimer County has 215 precincts in it. And at least in theory, every precinct should have two precinct organizers, or POs for short. Um, if somebody shows up at the caucus and you hear them call them a PO, it doesn't mean they have body odor, right? It's not BO, it's PO. Um, and a precinct organizer's job is basically to represent the party in their neighborhood precinct. Precincts are pretty small, even in the rural parts of our county, a few hundred voters each. Um, and it's your job to stay connected with them, let them know what's going on with the party, and also to attend some other party meetings so that you're informed about what the party's up to and can express your voice in shaping where the party is headed at the county level. So precinct organizers are an important thing to elect. Sometimes precinct organizers elected 2 years ago will show up to caucus. They know what's going on. They can be great teachers and helpers to people who are brand new. But that's not always the case because sometimes precinct organizers move. Sadly, some die um, or disaffiliate from the party. And so you may walk into a precinct that doesn't have a PO. And so somebody's going to have to step up and take the lead. And I encourage people to do that, right? Because it's actually not that hard to run a small meeting to vote on the two people who are going to be precinct organizer. The other thing that you've got to do at caucus, and this is really that part of the pipeline that goes all the way to the national convention, is elect some delegates out of your precinct who are going to go to first our county assembly. And then if they want to continue, can go to a congressional district assembly, can go to the state assembly, and maybe even all the way on to the national convention in Chicago. Um, the delegates to our county assembly are really, really important because they're the people who are going to get to vote on who the candidates are going to be for the Democratic Party on our ballot, right? Rather than leaving that up to me and a small group of insiders, right? That like we work out this deal, right? Um, the Larimer County Dems are really committed to fair and transparent elections, right? Where the decision about who gets on the ballot as a Democrat rests with the voting members of the assembly. So that may be in House District 51 in Loveland, voting for who's going to be the Democratic candidate to run to be the first Democrat to serve in House District 51 for over 40 years. Um, in Fort Collins, voters in House District 52 will actually have some competitive choices. There are multiple people running to be the representative in House District 52. So that precinct caucus is going to really, really matter. And sending people from those caucuses to be delegates at our assembly will probably help to determine who the person is who ends up getting nominated by assembly to be on our ballot in the fall. Those are really powerful things, right? If you complain about what goes on in local politics and you want a voice, showing up to caucus and running to be one of the few delegates that go from your caucus precinct to the county assembly gives you a chance to have a voice about that stuff. So I think that's some of the most exciting stuff about it, right? Is it's not like, who is this person on my ballot? But wow, I saw the two people on the ballot at assembly. I know the one that I liked. I got to vote for them. And now they're on the state ballot at the
Yeah.
end for November. That's a cool sense of empowerment, I think, for people who get involved that way. And you meet a lot of other people who, when you unify with them, you can have a real impact.
Yeah. Well, we have that saying that like all politics is local, but it doesn't always feel that way if we don't like really go to these places where we are having these conversations. And yet you just pointed out so many ways that it is super local. 200, 300 people talking about a decision together is doable, right? We can figure something out when we're representing 200 people,
Yeah.
and that's a
And
beautiful
let me be
thing.
clear that in an ideal universe, maybe everybody in every precinct would show up for caucus, but the reality is that it's usually a handful to a dozen, maybe, who show up per precinct. So you're right that
Hmm.
it's really doable. It's not a very hard debate. You don't have to use a lot of parliamentary procedure, right?
Yeah,
You can just talk as friends and say, yeah, I think Dawn should be our precinct organizer. And then Dawn gets elected precinct organizer, and then she helps things get done in the precinct for the next 2 years.
yeah, yeah. That is what was really super fun about it. And I remember there were maybe two or three people who were very interested at our table, and then a handful of people who were really going to be good at it, but not so sure that they wanted to do it, right? And so it was fun to just have those conversations about what was important and why and what we were going to do, and kind of like dig into that personal piece so that we had a chance to make a good informed decision. And it's like exactly how we make decisions in real life. It's not some real procedural thing that we think of, unless we have to once in a while. So it's a beautiful thing. So we have that coming up. I've got some important dates for you that I want to echo and make sure I got it right. So Saturday is the next workshop if you want to learn more about this.
Yep.
And that is a hybrid, so you can do online, but you can also come and join in person at 604 South Mason. What time is it on Saturday?
That's at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay. And that
And
is
then
Mason in Fort Collins, right?
Mason and Fort Collins. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to
Yep.
be sure I didn't send somebody to somewhere else. And then Tuesday, virtually. What time is that?
6:30 p.m. And
Awesome.
there's information about it on our website, larimerdems.org, that people can find out how to get the Zoom link to participate in that.
Awesome. And then there's going to be recording. So if you can't make those, you've got the option to learn the recording. You got this that gives you some overview. And you can call the office
Right.
starting in a couple weeks to talk to a real human about the real questions you have, which is nice. And you can go to the library to learn about the technology, which is, smart. I, Simple thing, but our libraries do everything. I swear they're like magicians,
Big fan of public
librarians.
libraries. Yes.
Yeah, they're awesome. I love it. So, with all of that we've covered, why would somebody want to do this who isn't thinking about it already? If they haven't been inspired by what you've said, what
Mhm.
might add to them thinking about this is something I should do?
So it goes back to the conversation you had about networking when you started our conversation. You mentioned that concept. And I know a lot of people are down on our political process and system these days, right? They feel like it's out of touch, it's remote, it doesn't understand them. Um, Going to a caucus, meeting a bunch of other people, even if it's virtually, right?
Mhm.
Um, who do care and are trying to make things better is going to inspire you that there is some hope for the future. Because there are people who are doing some work. And I have to be clear that the same experience is probably true on the Republican side. We have very different visions and values. But it is the case that going to any caucus or any neighborhood or local political meeting is going to make you feel like it's not just some faraway stuff in DC or even down in Denver. But there are people who care, and that'll probably inspire you a little bit to meet some of those people and get them into your social networks and help you feel a little bit less disappointed in our overall political process.
That does sound like a very good reason, actually. I knew there was a reason I wanted to ask you that question. So, um, I know that we've talked about wanting to do another future session because you have a bunch of knowledge and I want to pick your brain about things. And you said that getting along and learning like how to talk to other people is is really an important part. And I think that like ties with what you just said, right? Is that we might have very different values from other people, but we still have things we need to do together. And so I am very excited about learning more from you about that. So I'm
Hmm.
just teeing that up to let other people know that there's more fun things planned. And then we have another session planned very soon with Mike O'Connell, who's our Larimer County Dem Vice Chair. And he actually also wants to talk about like why why would I want to be a Dem? So going a little deeper into what you just said,
Hmm.
what is it that we have as shared purpose, and also really talking about the squeeze on the average American. And that to me is another thing that just strikes as a reason to get involved
Hmm.
because it's a bunch of little things that add up in our quality of life. It's not usually just one thing. It is a bunch of little things. And so these decisions that are being made when we can have a seat at the table, um, that can be how we feel more engaged. I know it has felt really good in the last couple of years when something is happening where I'm like, I know who to talk to. I
Yeah.
know who to go ask a question of. And like half the time when I'm mad about something and then I go find out about it, I'm like, oh, I was mad about like this thing that I was totally wrong about, right? Or there is like a reason that it was concerning to me, and having that conversation is incredibly empowering. And so I think that that's the other real benefit of these kinds of things is that we're making some connections, and getting a face out there to some of this stuff, and so that we have more people that we can talk to about the things that matter to us and some of those decisions that are being made that affect us, so that it's not happening to us, it's something we're part of. And I'm pretty excited about that. So before I wrap up, anything else that you want to share, anything important that you want to get out there that we just got to make sure we have a chance to hear?
So I think we should just mention that for people who show up to caucus and want to go farther along in the process, the next meeting will be March 16th, again at 10 a.m. virtually for the Larimer County Assembly and Convention, um, which is where we will be doing the nomination of candidates for countywide office, of candidates for different districts, where we'll be electing delegates to go on to the next meetings, et cetera. So depending on how deep of a plunge you want to take, keep that date, the 16th of March, on your calendar also, so that you can participate in that. And you know, I'll close with a thought that I've adhered to most of my life. Leap and the net will appear, right? And it's not because
Yeah,
it'll magically appear because someone's taking care of you, but if you leap and you realize you're falling, you're going to start working on building a net and building a network. So I'd encourage you to come to caucus, even if you feel like you're out of your depth. Once you're there, you can start building a network with maybe one person you know, or somebody who seems like a nice person to get to know, and start building that net so you don't feel like you don't know what's going on. And that's really how we can work most effectively together is take some risks and realize that we're hanging out there on a limb and then start building a net together. So
I I love that. Also, I'm reminded that I went to my first caucus with some of my best friends because even as a grown woman, it was nice to know that like I knew somebody walking in, and then it wasn't long before we were engaged with other people in the room.
mhm.
And I know that I went places with my husband and he like prefers to kind of watch what's happening, and often he doesn't say nearly as much as I do. But there's something beautiful about the ability to just see these things in action, and then hear what like he thinks of because he's watching is pretty cool too. So
Yeah,
um I'm just going to throw that out there for those of us who are across kind of those comfort levels. There's lots of ways to do this, and being virtual takes care of a big chunk of those, right? So
yeah,
I think this will be fun to see how it goes. I'm really grateful that I'm now smarter because you took the time to help me understand this. It really does dawn on me that there's a lot of ways to engage locally, and the ways that we make it accessible are how we get better voices, more voices, different voices at the table. So I'm grateful that you've taken the time to help think about how to engage more people, different people, because we have a lot of really great perspectives in our community. So thank you for all of
You're very
that.
welcome, and really, really grateful to have the opportunity to be with you today, Dawn. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Paid for by the Larimer County Democratic Party, 604 South Mason Street, Fort Collins, Colorado, 80524, 970-689-6391. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.